The supposed bond between Rollo and Ragnar begins on television, not in any surviving medieval genealogy. Their names lead across different coasts, different decades, and records created for entirely different political purposes. Ragnar belongs chiefly to heroic tradition, although possible historical echoes cluster around 9th century raiding leaders. Rollo emerges more firmly near the beginning of the 10th century, negotiating power along the lower Seine. No contemporary annal calls them brothers, companions, rivals, or even men who occupied the same expedition. Testing the connection therefore requires a journey through England, Francia, Scandinavia, and finally, Norman court memory. The earliest route begins before Rollo appears, when Scandinavian fleets repeatedly entered the kingdoms of Western Europe. Frankish annals recorded attacks because monasteries and royal administrations needed dates, losses, campaigns, and political responses. These texts sometimes identify leaders, yet their spellings vary as foreign names pass through Latin-speaking clerical hands. One such leader, Reginherus, commanded the Scandinavian force that reached Paris along the Seine in 845. Later, readers have often connected Reginherus with Ragnar Lothbrok, but resemblance of name cannot prove complete identity. The historical raid is secure, while the transformation of its commander into the saga hero remains an interpretation. Reginherus reportedly had ties to the Danish king Horik, placing him within 9th century Danish political competition. After the Paris expedition, his trace disappears quickly from the contemporary record rather than expanding into a documented biography. Ragnar traditions, by contrast, accumulated campaigns, marriages, sons, monsters, and royal encounters across later Scandinavian literature. Those episodes cannot be treated as one contemporary dossier merely because medieval authors joined them around one name. Several famous warriors active in Britain became remembered as Ragnar's sons, especially in much later narrative genealogies. Near contemporary English and Irish records know some of these leaders, but they do not securely establish their paternity. A great army captured York in 866, a generation after the Seine expedition associated with Reginherus. Its leaders operated inside real struggles involving Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and the expanding power of Wessex. Later revenge stories turned those campaigns into a family response to Ragnar's death at King Ella's hands. That narrative supplies dramatic kinship, yet the earlier chronicles describe invasion and dynastic conflict without confirming its premise. Rollo's recoverable trail begins farther south and later amid renewed Scandinavian pressure on the Seine Valley. Frankish writers refer to a leader whose name appears in forms related to Rollo, including Latinized variants. He participated in the unstable politics surrounding Rouen, the river approaches, and the authority of Charles the Simple. The decisive settlement is traditionally dated to 911, following confrontation and negotiation between Rollo and the Frankish king. No complete treaty text survives, so later narratives help reconstruct an arrangement whose exact terms remain debated. Rollo received authority around Rouen and accepted obligations that served the West Frankish crown's defensive interests. Land, loyalty, baptism, and protection became linked within a frontier settlement rather than a simple surrender. The new ruler could restrain other raiders while converting mobile military power into territorial lordship. Local inhabitants experienced that transition through changing tribute, jurisdiction, religious patronage, and control of strategic waterways. This political landscape belongs several decades after the events most often used to build Ragnar's historical core. If Reginherus of 845 was Ragnar, roughly 66 years separate his Paris raid from Rollo's settlement. Men could live long lives, but chronological possibility alone creates no meeting, friendship, or family relationship. More importantly, no evidence bridges the gap with shared campaigns, ancestry, correspondence, or a continuous leadership record. Rollo's baptismal name, Robert, marked entry into Christian aristocratic politics while not instantly erasing Scandinavian connections. His descendants consolidated Normandy through marriage, warfare, ecclesiastical patronage, and negotiation with neighboring rulers. Their dynasty needed an origin story capable of explaining how conquest became legitimate princely government. That need takes the journey from the 10th century Cine into the writing room of an 11th century cleric. Dudo of Saint-Quentin composed a history of the early Norman rulers under their descendants' patronage. His account is indispensable because it preserves traditions unavailable elsewhere, but it also serves a ruling family's prestige. Dudo gives Rollo an elevated Scandinavian background and organizes disorderly beginnings into a providential Norman foundation. He describes family relationships, exile, battles, dreams, conversion, and diplomacy with literary confidence beyond contemporary documentation. Yet Ragnar Lothbrok does not appear as Rollo's brother within this foundational Norman genealogy. That absence matters because a prestigious legendary brother could have strengthened, rather than embarrassed, a heroic origin. Silence never proves impossibility, but here it leaves the television relationship without support from its most relevant medieval narrative. Other later traditions disagree even about Rollo's Scandinavian homeland and ancestry. Some connect him with Norway, while Dudo presents a Danish origin shaped by his own narrative purposes. The Icelandic tradition identifies him with Gengerholf, a figure linked to the family of Ragnvald of Mora. Historians debate whether Gengerolf and the Saine leader were the same person. Neither version supplies Ragnar Lothbrok as a secure sibling, uncle, patron, or military associate. Genealogy becomes especially treacherous when courts used ancestry to claim rank, territory, and respectable antiquity. A medieval family tree could preserve information while simultaneously arranging the past for contemporary political needs. Archaeology cannot rescue the proposed bond by assigning famous names to ordinary objects or settlement layers. Scandinavian material in Normandy demonstrates migration and cultural contact, not Rollo's individual parentage. Burial evidence likewise cannot identify Ragnar's relatives without an independently secured grave and a defensible comparison. No authenticated grave of Ragnar Lothbrok provides that missing anchor. Genetic testing, therefore, cannot leap across unidentified remains and transform narrative characters into a documented family. The strongest argument for connection is consequently not medieval evidence, but modern dramatic architecture. A serialized drama benefits when distant historical developments can be experienced through one household. Making Rollo Ragnar's brother converts geopolitical change into rivalry, affection, betrayal, and competing ambitions. The audience can follow Normandy's beginnings without abandoning characters introduced during earlier raids on England. Chronology contracts, allowing Lindisfarne, the 845 attack on Paris, and Rollo's Frankish settlement to inhabit adjacent lifetimes. Real historical figures and saga motifs then become parts of a continuous ensemble rather than separate evidential problems. This strategy is effective storytelling, though it should not be mistaken for a claim discovered in the sources. Because viewers witness those scenes, fictional kinship can feel more concrete than fragmented annals and late genealogies. The performance produces psychological continuity, where the medieval archive provides only scattered names and political actions. Returning to the map restores the distances concealed by that continuity. Ragnar's possible echoes lead toward 9th century Denmark, Francia, Ireland, and the kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England. Rollo's secure political significance centers on the Lower Seine and the creation of a durable Norman principality. Their routes touch the same broad world of Scandinavian expansion, but shared geography is not personal association. Thousands of travelers, captives, merchants, settlers, and fighters moved through those networks across several generations. Two famous names can belong to one historical process without belonging to one family. Could a tradition now lost once have linked them in some fashion? Lost evidence is always possible, yet historians cannot convert that possibility into a positive conclusion. The proposed relationship would need an early genealogy, annalistic notice, or independent narrative, placing both men together. Even a new text would require scrutiny of its date, transmission, audience, and reasons for creating kinship. Until such evidence appears, the responsible answer remains narrower than the televised story. Rollo was connected to the kind of Scandinavian mobility and warfare later concentrated around Ragnar's legend. He was also connected indirectly to the Seine, where Reginherus had led a major expedition decades earlier. Those are structural connections across a changing frontier, not proof of blood relationship or personal acquaintance. Normandy's rulers later built their own memory of Rollo without making Ragnar essential to it. Ragnar's literary family developed elsewhere, absorbing leaders and campaigns into an increasingly elaborate heroic cycle. The two traditions traveled separately for centuries before modern screenwriting brought them under one roof. That merger tells us something valuable about how historical drama handles an archive full of gaps. Kinship gives audiences a stable emotional line through political transformations that otherwise require changing castes and generations. Compression also creates costs by making sequential developments look simultaneous and distinct traditions appear mutually confirming. Rollo's documented achievement needs no invented brother to remain consequential. He helped turn Scandinavian military presence near Rouen into a territorial power recognized within Frankish politics. Ragnar's importance operates differently as a name around which later writers organized memories of raiding and conquest. One figure anchors a dynasty with comparatively firm 10th century outlines, the other anchors a legend assembled from uncertain components. Placing them side by side clarifies why their television relationship feels plausible despite its evidential emptiness. They share a cultural horizon overlapping places and themes of ambition, movement, and rule. They do not share a securely attested parent, childhood, voyage, feud, or conversation. The missing link is not a minor detail concealed inside an otherwise documented family. It is the entire relationship created to bind separate historical materials into a single dramatic generation. Future discovery could refine Rollo's origins or illuminate early Ragnar traditions without necessarily connecting the two men. Only explicit, early, independently credible evidence could change the central judgment. For now, the Seine carries their stories through related history, but never confirms that their lives actually met. Rollo and Ragnar became brothers when modern television joined two timelines that medieval sources had left apart.